Hello, welcome to RC Video Reviews. Today we're taking a look at the new TX12 Mark II by Radiomaster. All right, we've got a lot to cover today. I'm going to talk about a few things I like, a few things I don't like. But before I get started, I want to make sure to let you know that this video is sponsored by Radiomaster. I'd like to say thanks to Radiomaster for sending this TX12 Mark II out for review. I've got a couple of other goodies to show you as well, but I'll remind you guys that Radiomaster does have a website for retail. So if you'd like to get your hands on this equipment, feel free to visit radiomasterrc.com. I'll have links in the description for everything you see today. All right, let's get into it. The TX12 fundamentally didn't change on the form factor. There were a few minor changes in terms of ergonomics, but it's the same size, right? It's the same kind of scaled down version of a TX16S. It's got the mono screen. It has only 4 toggle switches up top. You've got the E switch, which is 3 position. The B switch is 3 position. The C is 3 position. And the F is 3 position. You also have a couple of momentary switches up front with A and D. And the gimbals are Hall effect gimbals. And then, of course, you got the standard 4 trim switches. The big news in this one, of course, is the ELRS module internal. And I'm a huge fan of that. I'm really happy to see the ELRS module inside Radiomaster equipment right out of the gate. We also have a couple of sliders on the side, and notice no pots. That's one thing I kind of wish they would do, is add a potentiometer up here, because for me, I use my pot for volume. And it's a very convenient way to use S1 or S2 for volume. I use that quite a bit on my radio, so I kind of wish they had that on these. Right now I've got volume assigned to a slider, and that's just not a great solution because your hand is constantly bumping it. But that's the one thing I wish they'd add on here in terms of controls in the smaller form factors, a little pot up there for volume control. I do like the layout on this radio because they're using the same layout as the bigger radios. They've got a system button here on the left, a model button here on the right, and then the standard 4 buttons that you find on the full-size TX16S. Return, page right, page left, and tele. They also have the scroll wheel over here on the right. So it's a very short putt to go from a TX16S to a TX12. From a control and layout perspective, you're not going to fumble around. It'll be very comfortable to you in terms of where the buttons are laid out. On the top of the radio, there's a trainer jack and a USB port for connecting to the computer. On the bottom of the radio is a battery compartment, and they've got this little door. It's okay. I mean, it's fine. It does the job. The SD card is in there, and the USB port for charging is in there. I'm kind of not a huge fan of that because every time you charge a radio, you have to open this door, and it's going to lay there. You know, the battery could fall out. I'm just not a huge fan. I think the charging port just needs to be accessible on the side, or, you know, in the back, or somewhere where it's just easy to get to. They use standard 18650 lithium ion batteries, and the tray fits in the compartment just fine, and it's easy enough to plug it in. What I don't like about it is that it rattles around. So when you close the lid, and you got to get your cable tucked in there, but you get that lid closed, and then you move the radio, and the battery just kind of flops around in there. I'm sure somebody will come up with a 3D print or some foam or something, but to me, that's a kind of a factory thing that should just be taken care of. I think it's an area that can make an improvement by preventing that from rattling around. It just doesn't sound good. On the back, there is a FreeSky and JR module bay, which is kind of cool. So if you want to use Crossfire and ELRS, you can do that. Or if you want, you can add an external multi-protocol module if you want to do that. So they've kind of flipped the script. We used to put our ELRS modules in the back of the radio. Now that's internal. And if you want MPM, you can put that in the back. The other ergonomic change they made to the case are these back grips for your fingers. On the original Mark I, these grips were much shorter in length. So if you had bigger hands, they didn't wrap all the way around. Now they have that grip going all the way down the side, which is nice. You can get a good firm grip on the radio. Let's take a look at the software on the radio, and after that, we'll open it up and take a look inside. I've already made a couple of minor changes. One of the cool things on EdgeTX now is they have a power on delay option, and you can set that to 0, which I did, and you can also set the splash screen to 0, which I did. So if yours boots a little different out of the box, don't worry about it. I made a couple little software changes on mine already. So just press the button and power on, and we're right into the radio. You can see there's a model already established, TX12 Mark II, that comes on the radio by default. Now, Radiomaster does give a warning that this radio requires a Mark II firmware, so don't just download and install any EdgeTX. You need an EdgeTX TX12 Mark II. That should be available in the standard flash tools for EdgeTX. I would expect it to be in there. I haven't checked yet, but I expect it. If it isn't, it will be. So just remember, you need to use a Mark II firmware for this radio. Don't just grab the standard TX12. So we'll take a look at the firmware by pressing the system button and then page left. And you can see they've got EdgeTX TX12 Mark II. That's the designator right there, Mark II. The next thing I'd like to show you is the Express LRS setup, and we'll do that by pressing Model. We need to make sure that the module is turned on first. So go to the setup screen and then scroll up until you see the internal RF, and that needs to be set on Crossfire. In my case, it is. And then for status, we see 500 Hertz, 0 errors. Normally, that's going to be a firmware module version. I think the ELRS guys are working on that, but for now, they're just showing you that we've got communications with the transmitter. We have our channel range set to 1 through 16, and receiver ID is set to 0. So that's good enough to make sure that we can fire up the Lua script and talk to the transmitters. Next, we'll take a look at the Express LRS Lua by pressing the return button a couple of times and getting out of the setup. Then we'll press System, and we're on the Tools page, and you can see Express LRS Lua is loaded right there as number 2. So we'll press that, and when you see this status bar go zooming across, you know you've got a connection. I do want to point out that it does say Radiomaster Zorro. Wouldn't worry about that too much. That's just an Express LRS Lua identifier string. It's not really going to affect the communications with the ELRS module, so don't sweat that. One thing I do want to show you in here really quick is if you go under TX Power, make sure you change this one. Unless you know exactly what you're doing and you want to keep a low power rate, you probably want to take this max power and set it up a little bit higher, maybe 50 or 100. Now, I can tell you that with Express LRS, because of the protocols they use, they get really ridiculous range on very low power settings, but there's no harm in setting it up to 100 milliwatts and then turn your dynamic power on. And what will happen is the radio transmitter and the receiver will talk, and when the receiver needs more power, the radio will add a little bit more power to the transmitter. So there's no harm in doing that unless you have a very specific use case or you're experimenting or you know exactly what you're trying to accomplish. I'd recommend going ahead and turning that power level up to 100 and setting dynamic power to on. Anyway, there's a look at the ELRS module on the TX12, and everything to me looks like it's working just fine, so we'll back out of there. There are a couple of other Lua scripts on here from FreeSky and Graupner. There's a multi-channel namer, multi-config, multi-LOLI, PID DSM, and actually TBS Agent Light, and a wizard loader. So I'm not going to mess with a wizard loader. I'm not a big fan of the wizard. To me, that's a tech that just needs to go away. There's the file manager for the SD card. One question that continually comes up on these radios is, does it come with an SD card and what size is it? The answer is yes, it does, and it's 256 megs. And then I also get a gripe all the time about why 256 megs? And the answer is very simple, and it's just you just don't need more. There's plenty of storage space in 256 megs for everything you need for these radios. The one exception to that would be if you add a lot of music and you try and play music with the radio, that will take up some space. But I've got plenty of radios that work on 256 megs for a very long time. That's all you really need. On the radio setup screen, I'll show you, I'm not going to go through everything on the setup. I just want to give you a look at a couple of things that I noticed. So all the standard stuff up on the top, and scroll all the way down. Here it is, the power on delay. You can set that to 0. Power off delay if you want, you can set that to 0. Personally, I don't make a mistake when it comes to hitting my power button, so I like getting rid of those delays. I'm really a big fan of that. And then you can also set your splash screen delay and set that down to 0 as well. So if you do that, it just kind of speeds up the boot process, and I'll show you by hitting the power button and turning it off. So instant off, and then I'll press the power button again, and we pretty much got an instant on. So I think that's very cool, and I'm really happy to see that. I have one more mechanical feature to show you, and that is these screws up front. These hex screws are travel limiters. So by turning these screws down, you limit the travel. So as you drive that screw in, turning it clockwise, you limit the downward travel of this stick. So as I turn the screw, you should see that stick just ever so slightly move up. So we're limiting how far down the stick goes with that screw, and we limit how far up the stick goes with this screw. So if you want to reduce your travel, maybe you're a quad pilot or you're willing to give up a little bit of resolution, you can go ahead and adjust your endpoint travel using those two screws. Just make sure when you do that to recalibrate your radio. Don't forget to do that. By the way, same process on this side. You can limit the up and down travel on the right-hand stick using the same screws. There is no left and right adjustment, no set screws for left and right travel. It's only up and down, so the vertical axis. Okay, that's it on the outside of the radio. Let's open it up and take a look inside. Okay, to open the radio up, you've got 6 screws on the back. There's 4 on the top, 1, 2, 3, 4. I've already taken those out. And then there's a couple of screws on the bottom here, 1 and 2. You also need to make sure you take the battery out. Then the last thing to remove are these little switch covers. They need to come off. You just get a fingernail under there and pop those off. And when you've done that, the back cover should pop right off. And notice there's no wire connections. So once you remove it, it comes right off. Okay, internally, here's the battery connector, the SD card reader, and the USB charging jack. Here are the linkages for the gimbals on the right-hand side. There's a little RTC battery. Here's a look at the spinner, the haptic motor spinner, and it looks like they've got that mounted in metal. I think the original TX16S, there were some issues with that one with the plastic mount breaking, so I think they've kind of made an upgrade there, and they're using a metal mount for that. So that's kind of cool. That means that should last for quite a long time. On the pots, the big question on the pots always is how well do they center? And I'll say that they center, they feel good. They're not as aggressively centered as the new TX16S Mark II, but they do center well. You can feel it. There's not a problem. It's not as soft as like the original TX16S, but it's somewhere in the middle. It's between the Mark I and the Mark II. Another thing I really like that I'm seeing up top with the toggle switches is no more PCBs. They've got the, now I don't know if the original Mark I had PCBs on the TX12 or not. I don't recall, but I do like not seeing PCBs. That means that if you need to change a toggle switch, it's just a simple matter of unscrewing it, disconnecting the connector and popping it out and putting a new toggle switch in. Very easy to do. Now regarding the gimbal adjustments, if you want to adjust the throttle tension, you can do that with this screw. You just loosen or tighten as necessary, and you can make adjustments there. Regarding gimbal tension adjustment, there is no adjustment. So you can see here's the spring for the rudder. I'm kind of moving that right here. And if I take this screw out, all it does is remove the latch that spring is on. It doesn't adjust. There's no long screw adjusting the overall tension on that spring. So I cannot see any tension adjustments on these gimbals. They are Hall effect sensor gimbals though. You can see the sensors right there, and there's the magnet. So they are Hall effect sensors. And here, of course, is the Express LRS module. All right, and the last thing to point out inside is the removable antenna. So you can see they've got a jack here, and this does go back to one of the things I don't like. Of course, I like the idea of a removable antenna, but the problem is the design of the case has the knurled knob for the antenna, which is right there. You cannot get your fingers on that when it's screwed all the way in. Now, you can get it unscrewed, but, you know, it's kind of one of those deals, like it's a design flaw, right? If you're going to have a knurled knob for your fingers to get on, you should be able to reach it. And you can screw it in, but it's going to be limited as to how snug you can get it. And once you really start getting it tight, then this barrel up top starts to turn. So again, I don't really think it's a huge problem, but it's one of those things that if you're going to have it, then you should be able to reach it, right? It should be functional. And that's it. It's just a little nitpick more than anything else. I don't really have any fear that the antenna is not on securely or that it's not making contact. That's not a problem, but you just can't reach that knurled section of the antenna base. So just pointing it out. One last thing I'll say is if you're not used to having a removable antenna, make sure you have that antenna on there before you fire the radio up and enable your transmitter, because if you don't, you can cause damage to the transmitter. All right, to wrap up the review on the radio, a couple of specifications you might be interested in. This weighs 363 grams. It is a 2.4 gigahertz radio, not a 900 megahertz, so 2.4 gigs. It has a working current of 320 milliamps at 8.4 volts. It's got a voltage range of 6.6 to 8.4, so 2 lithium ions should be just fine. The radio does ship with EdgeTX out of the factory, as we showed, 2.8. The display is 128 by 64, and of course monochrome, so this is a non-color or black and white target, and the gimbals are Hall effect gimbals. Regarding charging, it has an upgraded charge controller, so it's using QC3, just like the Mark II on the TX16S. Okay, next up, Radiomaster sent me a couple of the new RP1 and RP2 receivers. This is the RP1 with the external antenna. And the big news on these is they have much larger solder pads. So it makes it a lot easier to solder when these pads are a little bit bigger. And they're also marked. They're labeled. So you've got negative, 5 volt, TX, and RX. Very easy to see on these receivers now. So if you've ever soldered on one of these really tiny Express LRS receivers, that's a nice little feature upgrade to have much bigger pads. The RP1 receiver comes with a 65 millimeter T antenna for 2.4 gigahertz, and they made a nice little upgrade because they included this molded plastic, which gives it just a much more finished look. They also have an optional 95 millimeter antenna, so this is sold separately if you need a little bit more distance on your antenna lead to mount your antenna where you want it. You can also get a 95 millimeter antenna as well. The RP2 receiver is more of the same. It's got the same larger pads with the clear marking on the back, but the big difference on this one, of course, is that SMT antenna right there. It's got that little square ceramic block with the antenna wrapped around it. So very similar, but there is no external attachment for an antenna on the RP2. Okay, that covers the radio and the receiver, but Radiomaster also has a couple of new accessories, which I think are really cool. This is the leather neck strap, and it is actually leather. So it's a leather neck strap, and they've got padded neck covers, so they're sweat absorbing. That's the idea. They sell these in red and black, and you can see I've got mine on already, but you can go without it too. It's just Velcro, so if you want to not use the padded cover, you don't have to use it. You can just go straight with leather, and I think it's very cool. Nice little upgrade, and I haven't worn it outside in the heat yet, but I can tell you that nice thick pad feels really good on the neck. That's a nice little touch. The other thing they recently came out with are these silicone switch covers, and I like them. Every one of them is labeled. So they've got trainer and gear and timer and buzzer and mode, F mode, and all kinds of different labels on these switch covers, which is okay. You know, if you need those or like those, you've got them. If you don't like them, you can simply put the switch cover on and flip it around so the text is facing back away from you and you won't even see it. And they've got two versions of these. They've got the short switch covers and the long switch covers. So if you look at the TX12 here, those are all short switches right there. And if you look at the TX16S, you've got the long switch here and the short switch here. So just make sure you get the right cover for the switches you need. On the TX12, they're all short switches. So you'd only need the short ones for the TX12. Radiomaster also started selling DIY switches for your radio. There's a couple of different kinds. They sent me 2 of them. So this red one has a standard momentary. So you just press it and let it go, and it's a momentary switch. And it's got the connector you need to connect directly to the main board on your radio. So very nice little upgrade. For a few dollars, you can add a momentary switch, and your Radiomaster TX16S Mark II, it's got the ports ready for you. And then the black one is a latching momentary. It's more like a standard toggle. So when you press that down, it stays closed or open, whichever. And then when you release it, it releases and it changes state. So it's binary, and it's got the same connector ready to go right on your main board on your radio. So very nice little options that are ready-made if you want to add some additional functionality to your radio. Okay, that wraps up my first look at the Radiomaster TX12 Mark II. Regarding a buy, no buy decision on this, all I can say is it's a fully functional EdgeTX radio with Express LRS, with a crazy good radio system, crazy good operating system. It's a radio that can serve you well for any type of flying you want to do. You do have fewer controls and switches, I'll admit that, and it is a small form factor, so if you've got big hands, maybe not for you, but for a child, it certainly would be a very viable first radio. I mean, a very high quality radio at a very compelling price point. So at the end, it comes down to a personal choice. You know, if you're into this form factor and you want something a little smaller, you can do with a few less switches. Maybe your budget only allows $100 on your radio. This would be a perfectly good choice. I wouldn't have any problem recommending this radio. And you guys know how I feel about EdgeTX. I just love that as a firmware. And I think Radiomaster's done a great job pairing and working with the community to pair the firmware to the radio and give a very compelling radio option for a compelling price at $100. All right, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. That's all I've got for today. Get out there and fly something. Take it easy. Hey, if you like the work I do here on RC Video Reviews, please consider joining me on Patreon. For about the price of a cup of coffee, you can help me keep making videos just like this one. If you'd like to help out, there's a link in the description and on your screen.